And we are now recording. So hello. Let's start out with who I am and why you might want to listen to even a single word I say, which, hi, I'm Praxila. I have been playing in the SCA. Well, I started in 1991, but I've been playing pretty solid and been an officer participating for only about 12 years. Mundanely, I am a crazy researcher. I have been lecturing recently on 16th century pattern books for lace and embroidery. Model booker, I own modelbook.com and do a lot of talking about embroidery patterns. This class is going to be on 16th century maps. Specifically, I'm talking about printed maps, and we will be approaching them more from a print standpoint rather than let's use this to go find something. Again, because that is how I came into this subject and what my interest is and what my background is and what I have any ability to talk about. I can hopefully send you off in some directions that will help you learn more if you want to look at them more as an engineer, cartographer, surveyors, using the maps. We'll talk a little bit about that, but primarily I am looking at them more as an artifact of print and in their fine arts context. So I'm going to start with why I am sharing this screen before we go over to the presentation. This right here is the history of cartography. It is a 7-volume set. It began in the University of Chicago Press started putting it out in 1986. It starts in cartography and prehistory, the ancient world, medieval Europe, and the Mediterranean. Then it goes into traditional and South Asian societies, and Southeast Asian. It goes into cartography in African societies, and then in volume 3 we come into cartography in the European Renaissance, and that's pretty much where I'm going to focus, is the European Renaissance. If you are interested in cartography at all, please come back to this website. The books are available for sale in hardback, but the PDFs are free on the site. You can go through, click on your section. For instance, right now we're looking at volume 3. This is part 1. Each one of the chapters is made up of an essay on a particular topic. They're about 30 pages each. You can download them for free. Again, I can't say enough about this resource. They're still continuing to print it. It is still coming out. They're updating it, and it is the most recent research and absolutely fabulous stuff. Cartography research was really big at about the end of the 1930s, and then it kind of lulled for a while. They're really starting to publish some amazing work in about the last 5 to 10 years. So once again, I will tell you about this website 3 or 4 times. It's also in my bibliography, but that is why this is up, so that even if you don't want to listen to a word I say, you can wander through this and find some fabulous information. Okay, so now I'm going to go over to me and what I'm talking about today. What I'm talking about today is printed maps in the 16th century. I came to these because in about the 1530s, there were 2 quote-unquote masters of map printing. They were Matteo Pagano and Giovanni Andrea Valvesaurus. And those names were really familiar to me because I research pattern books for embroidery, and there were about 150 of those printed in various editions beginning in 1524 and continuing.
Can't talk now. I'm in a class. I'll call you when it's done.
Okay. Anyway, several of those were printed, and I'm currently working on a foreword for a book and looking for biographical information on a printer who has very little biographical information. There has not been a major biography written on him, and so I started down some rabbit holes trying to find out about him. I mean, I knew basics. He was a printer. But in the process, I found out that he was best known as a map maker. He was Matteo Pagano. And so I started reading bits and pieces of information on cartography and the printing of maps, searching for the sentence here, the 2 lines here, the whatever it is. And as a result, I kept coming upon these incredibly beautiful, beautiful pieces of art that are also what maps are in the 16th century. Map making just explodes because exploration is exploding in the 16th century. And the printing of maps begins about in the 1480s, and it really gets going in the 1430s, the 1530s, the 1550s, and continues on. And part of it is because people are interested in exploration and actually using these maps. And part of it is because people are looking at these maps like we do and seeing them as beautiful works of art, and they want to collect the prints, they want to post them on their walls, they want to hang them up, to the point where the Senate hires one of the map makers, the Venetian Senate hires one of the map makers to paint frescoes of maps of Asia and Africa on their walls. So these are being used for a variety of reasons in a variety of ways. I've kind of mixed and matched these because majority of the maps that we have that were published, we only have we have less than 4 copies of any map, even if it was printed in hundreds of copies or over several editions and printed even more than that. We have maybe between 1 and 4 copies. We have lots of copies where lots of things we know existed that we don't have copies of. So I'm going to be using a lot of this name you see right here, which is Gastaldi. Gastaldi is astounding because in one book alone, he published a copy of Ptolemy with 60 different maps. And as a result, there are more of his surviving than just about anybody else. So a lot of these will be labeled Gastaldi, and they will have either been republished by someone else or he has republished someone else's map. And we'll talk about that one as we go through. But this is his map of the world from 1548. It is an especially interesting map because, as you will see here, we have North America and South America. And this is the first published example we have of a map with the entirety of both. 1548. Okay. So printed maps of the 16th century. And on we go. I'm starting with this. This is Valvesaurus' 1515 Battle of Marignano. It is not a map. It is a city view and a battle. And I've put it out here because it's one of the first earliest pieces and kind of that transition where we have sort of kind of illustration, sort of kind of map. This is part of basically the entertainment industry. The Venetian printing industry is publishing brochures of poems about battles going on and various information on those things as a way in which to both inform and entertain the public. And as a result, we get things like this particular print. Okay, so the state of print culture. We have what are called flying prints, which are broadsides basically before broadsides are a thing. They're they're small pieces of paper. They are cheap pieces of paper. They're intended to have, they're not bound. They're not intended to have other things associated with them. They're just one-offs. And they are sold by booksellers. Booksellers are not just guys that you go to get a book. They're out there being performers. So they will perform a poem or a song and then want to sell you the sheet with it printed on it so that you can have your own copy. And so they're performers out there doing things in the streets. So we start with those. Those are the lowest thing that are being printed, and those are available for very, very little. We have chivalric romances, which were very, very popular, like Orlando Furioso. Devotional texts are becoming a big seller. Well, I mean, they've always been big sellers, but not just the books themselves or book of hours, but all kinds of things associated with that. We have poems, we have plays, we have brochures with news on battles. Literacy has really risen. These these numbers are really having risen. We have 33% in males approximately, and approximately 13% in females is what we're seeing as our literacy rates in the 16th century. There are over 1,300 printers working in Venice between 1501 and 1600. And that's not people working in the printing industry. That is actual presses. There are 1,300 different presses off and on in Venice, and they tend to be only about the length of one person's life or a few years, and then they go in and out of business. Becoming profitable and staying profitable can be difficult. It is an oversaturated market, but also there is a huge need for this, a huge want for this, a desire for people to own print, to have pictures, not just reading material, but pictures and patterns, everything from decorative prints that you just plaster on your wall like wallpaper to using, this is one I talk about in my model book class, is they're putting out things like roundels that you can slap on a piece of wood, decoupage it on, and it becomes a trencher for you to use. All kinds of uses for print, and they're finding new uses constantly. Survivals, and this is an important note. A lot of the printing just doesn't last, and it wasn't intended to last, but even things that were intended to last haven't. Most of the maps, like I said before, survive in 4 copies or less. We have a complete list of over 27,000 editions. That's not pieces of copy, but an edition. And an edition ranges anywhere from, a small edition is normally approximately 100 prints of something, to a large edition is about 400. So 27,000 editions of what we actually know, can write out, know where it is, and is listed. And that's on Edit 16, which is again a fabulous website. It's just a list of 16th century books and ephemera. Experts estimate that there are 50 to 60,000 more that are either potentially surviving, they're in someone else's hands, maybe lost, could be in a library somewhere. That happens frequently, where it's just no one knows what it is, or it's bound with something else, or any number of things. So we have about that many things that are floating out there we don't have exact data on, and maybe another 50% that we have no record of. We don't know if it was published or not, but we know that there was a lot going on, and so the assumption is there's that much that we just know absolutely nothing about. It is a saturated market. It's not just being sold in Venice. Venice is the center of the printing industry at a certain point. There's also a huge Flemish and German industry. The Italian industry moves around as well throughout time. But Venice and other places are big. They really, it is where things are coming out. And then they're not necessarily being sold in Venice. They're being taken and sold by other printers in other places. They're being sold at book fairs. Germany has a huge history of book fairs going back to the 13th century. So huge amounts of print being sent out of Venice. This is actually the first map I ran across that got me into this. This is a view of Cairo, Egypt. It is was published by Matteo Picano in 1549. This happens to be a hand-colored version of it, so it would have just been the plain single color, and then you can hire someone to color it for you, which increases the price. Sometimes printers actually had them available that way. They would sell it to you that way, where they had already hired someone to do the color. This view of Cairo is actually the standard depiction for over 250 years. So it remains standard clear into the 18th century, which is one reason that these are important, is that they are kind of grabbing the imagination of people, letting them, shaping their view of things, shaping what they know of other places by what they're seeing in print. All right, back to the printing industry. It's not a homogeneous industry. Up until recently, the research has kind of pointed that way. It's mostly focused on the big publishers. More recently, there have been some amazing work coming out by Natalia Lucy, Rosa Santago, a few others on the middle and the cheap prints and the mix of what's going on in the industry. We have everything from these large houses, which are dividing up the workload, having printers in one place and the engravers in another place and the booksellers separately, to the mid-range, which is where our particular map makers, Valvesaurus and Pagano, are. They're all in-house. They do the printing, they do the engraving, they do the selling. You also have some that are incredibly jealous of their blocks, and others more cooperative. The mid to small publishers tend to be a little bit more cooperative in that they're working with each other, they're sharing things. For instance, there's an example of one of Pagano's maps that was published on paper that had been previously used by Valvesaurus and then discarded. He was publishing a map set, a very, very large map set, and decided that there was issues with it, and so he discarded some of the paper. He and Pagano were friends, or if they weren't friends, they at least talked to each other on a somewhat regular basis. Pagano gets the paper from Valvesaurus. He's printing a smaller map, and so he uses that, but you can still see the evidence that it had been previously used by Valvesaurus. So you have things like that. You have basically rental of wood blocks and copper engraving in order to be used. You have some instances of a printer acting as an engraver for another imprinter, or again, buying their prints from them to resell. And that tends to happen more in the medium to low as opposed to the upper, but it's not a homogenized industry. It's a huge variety. And it's a hop and place. It's on this next statement, which is on the Frasaria. The Frasaria is one of the long hugely long roads. There are two in Venice where shops are, and you have everything from secondhand clothing to goldsmiths, embroiderers, and anything that you want to buy is going to be available there. And the printing industry tends to kind of all cluster on, again, there are two, they cluster on the Frasaria or just off of it, and in that general neighborhood. They're within a mile or less of each other. Well, much less, actually, a couple of blocks of each other. Interestingly enough, the Printers Guild, even though Venice is huge for printers, the Printers Guild doesn't get going until quite late into the 1540s, and we don't have records of their meetings until the 1570s. Previous to that, you have in the 1530s, some printers are members of the Painters Guild, but a lot of them are not guilds. And you get a lot of immigrants coming in, and they start by selling those super cheap prints, like we were talking about, the flying prints, and they make some money on that, and then they kind of upgrade what they're making, because the next thing requires a little bit more capital, and they've assembled that capital, and so they can kind of upgrade, and that tends to happen. Or you have, it is a industry that somebody can come in and become good at and make money at and become respected by their neighbors. Okay. Are there any questions at this point? Anybody have anything that they would like me to look at a little bit more before I move on? Oops. Before I move on a little bit. Let's see if I can get chat here. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. So I will continue babbling. We're going to talk about privilegio, and then I swear we'll get through this, and then we'll move on to the pretty. Privilegio is sort of an early form of copyright, but not exactly, and not everybody applies for it. Privilegio comes from the Senate in Venice, and you apply to the Senate, to the Council of 10, for the privilege of publishing whatever it is you're going to publish, a license to publish for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And it is your right to publish whatever that is. We actually see it in England, the same sort of thing. It's not privilegio, but it is how they work their licensing. And it actually stymies the music industry in England, because that license is being given for 15 years, and only that one individual can publish things, and so you have people not publishing. You do have that with the privilegio, where you have people who have been given the privilege of publishing something specific, and they'll wait 2 or 3 years before they publish it on a 15-year, I'm the only one that can publish this. But in Venice, you have a lot of people who are not publishing, who do not have privilegio. They are not asking for it. They're not receiving it. Up until about 1540, it's really not pushed too much. You got people who can acquire that, and it is obviously, if you have the privilegio, you point out and write out on whatever you're publishing that you have that. But if you don't, there are still people publishing things, and anything cheap, anything with limited text, anything that sells for under, I think it's like 1 scudi, you can totally do that, no problem at all. You don't have to license it, and it's not even dealt with. You couldn't even get a license if you wanted one. So it's an interesting thing. There's a fascinating book on it, which is Copyright in the Renaissance, Privilegio. And also, I'll talk about that one a little bit later. Well, I'll point out where you can find that a little bit later. All right. And we'll look at another pretty thing before I continue babbling. This right here is the oldest known printed navigational chart. It was originally published in 1539 by Valvesaurus. The only known copy from the this is the only known copy of the 1541 edition, and we have no copies from the 1539. It is the description of the Adriatic Sea. This is intended to be a sailor's chart. It is, as such, you would put your instrument here and these particular lines. These are not projections. They are intended to be used as they are. Can I zoom in at all? Let me see if I can. Oops. Which is one reason I was trying to do it in here rather than just in the, whoops. Let's see if I can do it in presentation or not. It's a little bit larger. My suggestion would be going to this is the Royal Museum of Greenwich, rather. You can go there and they have it huge, and you can look at it in little bits and pieces. This was the largest version I could just download. Obviously, you're going to go there. You're going to focus on your itty bitty tiny bit wherever you would like to look at. This is mostly, hey, go look at this. It's pretty awesome. But these were being printed. This one happens to be on 2 sheets of paper. You can see that it's being done on a large ground. Okay, next question. Since we talked about it's a saturated market, there's lots of people printing. Why are they printing maps? First of all, like I said, it's an immigrant-driven industry at a particular point in the industry. You have a huge amount of stuff going on. I mean, there are wars going on. There are shifting boundary lines. The Ottoman Empire is spreading. The Byzantium has recently fallen. Well, not super recent, but has fallen. You have people moving around. You have Charles V invading Italy. You have all of this stuff going on. And so, one, people want to know what's going on. They're interested in it. They're also interested in the exploration. Books on travel and geography are huge. Travelogues are gigantic. They sell incredibly well. And so prints out of travelogues sell incredibly well. They sell for people who want to look at them, and learn. You have lots of examples of people hanging things on their wall. And in a lot of cases, you have Venetians who are buying Venetian upper class who are buying prints, and they're putting them on their wall of maps. And those maps are of places that are not Venice. They're places where things are going on. Again, it helps them to visualize what's happening. It's partial entertainment, partial business, partial just looking at these because they're beautiful in their own right. Our states and our borders are in flux, and you have the question of where is that happening and what does that look like? One of the most popular, where is it? Come back to it. Here it is. I'll go back. But this is a city view of Trent. It was published by Valvesaurus when the Council of Trent was being held. It was incredibly popular. Here it is in color. 2 examples where they've been colored. They are incredibly popular because this amazing, important thing is going on, and people want to know what it looks like. They want to be able to visualize it. And so Valvesaurus took this and created this view of the city of Trent and sells it and it's hugely popular because that's what people are talking about, and being able to have that adds to your cachet, your ability to talk to others, the fact that you're up and coming and interested, and also it's just a beautiful piece of art as well. Let's go back. All right, so I've been talking mostly about Venice again because I know more about Venice, so Venice is what I feel comfortable talking about, but I will talk about other places and then we'll move to Venice. This right here is one of the first world maps. Well, first world maps printed is by Francesco Roselli from Florence. He was the first map publisher to actually make enough money to be just a map publisher. We have his inventory of when his son died. So the workshop had gone and become his son's. We have that inventory. And it includes maps of Hungary, France, Crete, Italy, Lombardy, India. There's city views of Pisa and Constantinople and Rome and Florence. Those are what he has in maps just to sell. The most expensive impression inventoried is a colored navigational chart that went for 7 lira. So, and it was a large navigational chart. I believe that one was, that one was 3. He does have plates for an 8. But regular large prints from his workshop cost 3 lira, 1 lira for medium to small, and small was on paper about 9 inches to 15 inches, 9 by 15, range from 3 to 7 soldi. So it wasn't the cheapest thing ever, but it was certainly within the range for somebody to be able to purchase. He had plates in his inventory for a 6-sheet map of Italy, a 2-sheet world map, which is, I believe this one is the 2-sheet, but it's been added to, a 12-sheet world map, which is gigantic. Later on, I'll show you a picture of an 8-sheet, and I believe that one is like 50 inches by 60 inches. So it's a 12 or a 16-sheet map would be a wall. It would be huge. There's also a 16-sheet world map. And his are really interesting because he comes up with this idea where first of all, he's working in copper. Some of the later ones won't. Venice, for some reason, really doesn't like working in copper. They tend to be wood carvers. Well, actually, I can tell you the reason, and I'll come to that in a minute. But his are metal plates, and he binds them in frames of 4. So he can actually do these larger maps a little bit more easily rather than trying to line up the four plates. We know because his copper plates were, when his son died, his Roselli's grandson, so his son's son, became a ward of the state because there was no one else to take him, which is why they were inventorying so that they could have an income for him. And as a result, they valued the plates for scrap because it was copper. And so thus we know that all of his plates weighed 475 pounds. That's what he had in the shop. A lot of copper. But Roselli's working and really making map printing a thing. From Florence, it goes to Rome, and there are some major Roman publishers. But it's in Rome for about 20 years, and the industry center is there. It stops in 1527 because Rome is sacked. So you lose a good 2/3 of the population. No one wants to live there anymore. They can't make money, and away they go. The Roman printers are centered in a district of the Piedmont. It's a hangout for archaeologists and antiquarians interested in ancient Rome. Those are people again, we have neoclassicism happening. We have the Renaissance still bleeding into the early modern, where people are interested in what was going on in ancient Rome. And so you see a lot of publication of old books. The big one is I'm going to say Plutarch, but that isn't who it is. Give me a second and I'll remember which guy with a P is important. But you have goldsmiths, bankers, print sellers, and merchants are all selling to a high-class clientele in that area. And collecting prints is certainly a thing in Rome. And then we move to Venice. Taking a break to look at this amazingly cool map. This is Tierra Nueva. It is the North American coastline from Florida up. If you turn your head this way, you can see what you're looking at. But you start to see these amazing things coming out. People, they're paying cartographers, they're paying, and they're stealing other people's ideas and redoing them. But people want to see these. They want to see what's going on. The industry in Venice. So, like I said, wood engravings are preferred. The reason being, in Venice, okay, so at this point in publishing, you have to take a graver and you have to hand carve into a copper plate, and it takes normally the people who are doing it are apprentice goldsmiths, or journeyman goldsmiths. They're people who have that huge amount of background and skill, because it is a highly skilled thing. Chemical etching happens in about 1580 and really totally changes everything. But previous to that, they're being done manually with a very small graving tool. So in the area around Venice, you have some incredibly talented wood carvers. And some of those have just immigrated from places like Brescia, which is now owned by Venice, into Venice proper, and they are making wood blocks, and some of them become printers. And so that's why, is that it was more, the wood block was more accessible for them to work in than copper, because of the training they had. So again, I've been talking about, the first maps in Venice come from a gentleman named Benedetto Bordone. He is a miniaturist. He does a few. Pagano and Valvesaurus get going in the 1530s. And when I say they're making maps, the total output of Valvesaurus of new maps that we know of is between 20 and 22. It was 19 in the 1930s, but we found a few more since. But he's considered a master map maker based on 1920 maps. Valvesaurus is published with the nickname Guadagnino, which means a small profit. So that's important to him, to the point where that's what he's using as his name. Pagano uses M. Fede, which is because his shop is at the sign of Fede, which is clasped hand or sign of faith. And a lot of the things we're going to look at here next come from Giacomo Gastaldi, who was named a cosmographer to the Republic of Venice for his major contributions to map making, cosmology, and geography. And many people swiped his prints, which is totally fine, because he swiped other people's. For instance, Pagano worked as one of his engravers, well, one of his woodcutters early on, and Gastaldi published Pagano's for years after. Pagano applied, in the one case in which he ever applied for privilegio, he applied for privilegio for a series of maps that Gastaldi had written the libretto or the Latin text for. So it's a give and take, it's a back and forth. They are sometimes recarving the plates quite frequently, and you'll see this based on this, based on that, based on this. But you have lots of the different printers, including Hieronymus Koch, Lucchini, Ortelius, all basing themselves on Gastaldi, and Gastaldi borrowing heavily from them. And here's the P guy, Ptolemy. Sorry, like I said. So you have a 1548 version of Ptolemy's geography, and they were this was such a popular work to the extent that atlases were published in Ptolemaic order. They were published even with new maps kind of shoved in there, but they were published in the rate in which he had discussed them. And I seem to have missed the, where's my chat? Yes, maps could be reproduced quickly and cheaply using the prick and pounce method, but also at this point they were pretty cheap to just have the printers publish them for you. I mean, get them for you. Everything from a small print to large prints. You get the large, very expensive prints, but they're also publishing small versions, so that the guy on the street, well, maybe not just the guy on the street, but somebody can certainly afford these. But they are being widely disseminated, and the prick and pounce is being used to then take a map that you've gotten from someplace else and recarve the block. We talked about the frescoes on the walls of the Doge Palace. And we looked at Trent. This is Gastaldi's view of South Africa, which was in 1548. It's part of the Ptolemy. Here's his view of Southeast Asia. Just to point out that they're not isolated. I mean, some of these are a little bit, we're not quite sure what that looks like, but on the whole, these are pretty accurate maps, and they're being published. They're being made available. And as I go through, a lot of these were the first published map of whatever, 1548, 1554. So these are being spread out, but they're also innovative. They are not something that anyone's ever seen before, and so people want them. This is the first map of Iceland, published in 1548. And it is also a Gastaldi. Again, because Gastaldi, we have more examples that survive of Gastaldi. This is Gastaldi's Italy, which is based on Valvesaurus' Italy. Doing time-wise. Here is not just Italy, but we have clear into further on into Asia, and so we can have small parts of it. And this one is really nice because you can see the seam lines of the sheets of paper. This is Gastaldi's New Spain at 1548. New Spain being, well, here's Florida. And we see down over here, it's Spain's holdings. Here's Gastaldi's Russia. So again, I think these are important because we're seeing how much people's eyes are being opened a little bit to what's out there more. I mean, that you can actually not just hear about it or not just talk to someone, but physically see a representation of what it looks like. In my bibliography, there's an amazing book that just came out in 2018 And it's called like Venice's Exploration of America. It might be a little bit different, but we'll get there. And really talking about how while Venice didn't necessarily physically explore, its using of technology to disseminate that information really shaped how Europe is seeing these other places. Here's Castel de New France, which is it's New England. What we now call New England. So here's Labrador going down the coast. Uh, 1542, this is the first published map of Scandinavia. This one here is the first published map of Croatia. And it is published by Pagano in 1530. This is one of those ones where he was working for Gastaldi, and he engraved this one and published it before Gastaldi could get the privilegio and publish it. So it was later published by Gastaldi. But this is Venice owns Dalmatia. Hungary is the Hungarian-Croatian crown at this time. The Ottomans are expanding their borders, which is one reason we don't have country lines on this, because they're moving around. And so this was a very popular map because of all that was going on there, and people wanted the ability to visualize it. This is Valvesaurus world map, which I showed you a different version of earlier. Well, I showed you, yeah, the colored version of at the beginning. This is a combination map and battle discussion. It's Valvesaurus' view of Tunis when it was captured by Charles V, published in 1535. And we see the walled city and all of our tents and boats, ships coming. So it's a combination of things. This is Florami's version of Constantinople, taken from an earlier version of by Valvesaurus that doesn't survive. Gastaldi also did a version of Constantinople, vaguely based on Valvesaurus as well. So, as I said, there's back and forth. This is Gastaldi's 1550 world map. I showed you a different version of that earlier, but again, with the North and South America. This is Cyprus. Sorry, we're running a little low on time, and I will publish this so that you guys can come back and look at the maps, because that's what this is. What is fun is looking at the maps. This is Pagano, Cyprus. This is a 1553 map of Spain by Hieronymus Koch, which was originally published by Valvesaurus in 1532, and then Pagano published it, and then Koch published his own version, which also happens where, for instance, Koch published his version of some ornament, and then Valvesaurus swiped it to republish as a lace book, and Pagano published that, and then Valvesaurus republished Pagano's. And again, copyright is a little bit more than a little fluid. This is Gastaldi's map of the Piedmont, which was actually published under Privilegio. But previous to that, Pagano had published it. It was published in 1548 by Gastaldi, and then, but previous to that, Pagano had published it. So Castel's hemispherical map from 1565. I think this one is just strikingly beautiful. And this was published within a book. Most of these don't survive in the books because people pulled them out of them. Modernly, some of them never got in books because when you purchased a book, it wasn't bound in the first place. And so depending on why you were buying something, you may have already broken it up before it even got bound. This is Gastaldi's large map of Africa. Go back, Prax. This is a reprint from his blocks by Bertelli in 1573. This is an 8-sheet print. It measures 45 by 50 inches long. Just to tell you, when we talk about a 12-sheet print or a 15-sheet print or a 16-sheet print, just how large those were, just what's going on, that they're gigantic. And they are being used as art. They are being used not just as something that you keep in an atlas and fold away, but these are being displayed. This is Valvesaurus world map again, a little bit different. All right, and here is the bibliography. Yeah, The Venetian Discovery of America, Geographic Imagination in the Age of Encounters by Elizabeth Hordwich, which I can't recommend enough. It's a fabulous book. The next two are the only thing that is available at this point. They haven't been rewritten. They're Leo Bagrau, who wrote A History of Cartography in the 1930s. It was the standard work until it's been recently replaced by the University of Chicago, is really trying to replace it. They're really useful, but they do need to be updated because we have found things since they were from the 30s and early 40s. But they are still considered the standard work on Valvesaurus and Pagano as cartographers, but they don't talk about the individuals, they talk about the specific lists of maps. Map makers in the 16th century and their maps, which is Robert Caro, which is pretty much based on Leo Bagrau, so it's not a lot of updating, but it's easier to acquire than the Bagrau. The Italian map trade, 1480 to 1650, that is available from the University of Chicago HOC, which is the History of Cartography. That link goes directly to the index that we were looking at earlier, and you can download that particular article. And then Staying Afloat, which is nothing to do with maps, just to do with the printing industry, the printing workshop of Valvesaurus. And Natalia Lessi in 2017, her doctoral work is also available online and is totally worth a look if you are at all interested in 16th century middling range print shops. Okay, I think I've certainly talked long enough. So are there any further questions? Alrighty, and I'm gonna stop the recording.